Time now for the Sunday Talk. Tonight, the politics of Donald Trump. Polls have had him leading the Republican primary for months now. But this week, Trump's proposition to ban Muslims from entering the United States shocked adversaries and drove his poll numbers up even higher.
He's a race-baiting, xenophobic, religious bigot. You know how you make America great again? Tell Donald Trump to go to hell.
From a Republican rival all the way up to the GOP's top elected official in Washington.
What was proposed yesterday is not what this party stands for, and more importantly, it's not what this country stands for.
Even for his own party, Donald Trump crossed the line by proposing a religious test to enter the U.S.
Total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States.
Leaders around the world weighed in.
Someone in my position shouldn't be commenting on domestic politics in another country, but I think Canadians know exactly where I stand on those issues.
I want surveillance of these people.
But outrageous comments and fear-mongering are part of Trump's brand.
We're going to build the wall, okay? Believe me. We're going to build the wall.
A wall to keep out illegal Mexican immigrants.
They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists.
Despite all this, Trump remains bulletproof, poll after poll, resilient. And the uproar he causes among the Republican establishment seems to be at the heart of his appeal.
They just love what we're doing. We're going to take the country back. We're going to make it great again.
We're going to just be steamrolled one more time by this GOP machine. And here comes this guy,
Donald Trump.
Donald Trump.
I love it that he's got the establishment in a tizzy.
Washington wants to shut him out, but Trump is already thriving on the outside. I'm joined by our panelists. Jonathan Kay is editor-in-chief at Walrus Magazine. Tasha Keratin is a columnist with the National Post and iPolitics. And our guest panelist tonight is Lenny McAllister. He's a Republican commentator and author, and he joins us from Pittsburgh tonight. Hi, Lenny, I'll start with you. How do you explain the phenomenon that is Donald Trump?
Donald Trump is a combination of two things. Number one, he's a combination on the presidential level of the Tea Party, even more ramped up than Ted Cruz and Rand Paul and Marco Rubio, who, by the way, those three represent the Tea Party movement of 2010 and 2012. People forget that because Donald Trump has taken that to another level. So he's a combination of the Tea Party movement that's very much anti-Republican establishment, coupled with unfortunately, an American phenomenon that we see when the economy is bad and there's a lot of domestic and international fears going on out there where people seem to rally around controversial remarks in regards to race or sexism or xenophobia. You combine those two and take somebody that understands media, that has been a reality show star and has been in the limelight in America since the 1980s, from Trump Tower and owning a team with the USFL all the way through his affair with Marla Maples, all the way through to The Apprentice, and now running for president.
John, you lived and worked in the States for a number of years. You wrote a book about political conspiracies. How do you explain this?
Well, at the heart of many conspiracies is a fear of power and a fear of the idea of power and elites in smoky rooms deciding the fate of the country without the population having any say. And if you look at Trump, he reflects that phenomenon. He's not someone who's held elected office. He's never been employed in Washington, so a lot of people love that. In fact, the person who looked like he was rivaling Trump, Ben Carson, no surprise that he was a former doctor, he also wasn't a politician. And so this is something that's embedded in the American DNA. They are afraid of any kind of big government. It's something that dates back to the 18th century when they rebelled against the British. It's something that's always been part of their political culture. And here in Canada, we don't understand that because it's not part of our political culture. We were suspicious of Justin Trudeau because he only had 7 or 8 years of political experience. We held that against him because we thought his resume was thin. And here you have Trump, a guy who has no political experience at all, and that's seen as his greatest asset.
Well, Tasha, I guess the closest we've come recently, or obviously in Canada, is the Rob Ford phenomenon. A fellow who is very anti-elite and populist. Are we that different? How do you see the phenomenon here versus there?
Well, I think we are different, but the Ford comparison, I think, is apt because Ford also brought a level of celebrity, if you will, and business acumen that Trump did as well. Trump is the celebrity businessman. He's kind of like, you know, the Kim Kardashian of hotels, if you will. Everyone knows his brand. Everyone knows who he is. Ford had a bit of that too, in that people saw him, ironically, as a populist, while he was actually a very wealthy scion of a decal and tags label-making company in Toronto. But he came across as everyman, and that potent combination, I think, is very appealing. At a time, I agree, when people are very afraid, I agree with what Lenny said, this fear factor makes people look for the so-called strongman candidate. And both of them embodied that kind of thing, and both said outrageous things all the time, and it didn't seem to matter. But I think Canadians are different in the sense that in the end of the day, Ford's stuff did start to matter. People did start to turn against him. He was out of the race because of cancer at the end of the day. But I think that we are perhaps not as afraid as Americans are in this situation, and therefore there's less of an appeal of that type of person for us.
So, Lenny, quite the contrast. I don't know how much you follow Canadian news, but this week with Syrian refugees have been accepted in Canada. The new Prime Minister has been there to welcome them. I mean, is there, do you think, a stronger feeling, something that John was talking about, of this sort of anger against the elites? Is that stronger in the States, do you think?
Absolutely. It absolutely is, and that's part of the reason why President Obama is having troubles when it comes to Syrian refugees and the proposals that he's put forward, because, again, he is seen as being professorial, he's seen as being elite, he's seen as being detached, and dealing with this situation when people are dealing with grassroots fears. And it was enough to quell this movement that, again, people forget the Tea Party movement, and we're finding this out in the presidential race this time around. The Tea Party movement was against President Obama and the Republicans. So when you have this fear and you have this frustration and it bubbles over, whether it's Syrian refugees or the like, you're going to have this active movement that's going to go against this. So yes, in many, many regards, you're going to see a different type of tone towards that movement, unlike what you're seeing in Canada. And you're going to see people here be a lot more defensive as well. You got to understand, when you have a culture of guns, you have a culture of self-defense that's very different here in the States than it is in Canada. Therefore, the reactions to things along the lines of, are we bringing in people that could end up being radicalized on our soil and thus carrying out an attack? There's people in the States, we're going to have a different reaction collectively than you may have up north.
So where on earth does this all lead? He keeps going up in nearly all of the polls, Tasha. The Republican leadership doesn't seem to be endorsing him like we saw in the last round of the Tea Party, where the Tea Party people were sort of embraced. Where is this heading?
Well, I think that unless the party does coalesce around another candidate, the sort of anti-Trump, if you will, the fact that there's such a very large field works to Mr. Trump's favor. You know, Ted Cruz is leading now in Iowa. He's part of it. He was a Tea Party. He's a Tea Partier, if you will. But he embodies more religious, evangelical type of base. Trump definitely doesn't appeal to that score. So I don't know if there's going to be that kind of decision by the party. We're going to go in that direction, which I don't think is necessarily an election winner either, but to find a candidate, pick a candidate, one of the others, who is that, and group around them so that they become the anti-Trump.
Do you see him being stopped, John?
You know, people talk about him being sort of, you know, only in touch with the radical fringe of the party. But if you look at the surveys, something like 2/3 of Republican primary voters agree with his position on excluding Muslims from the United States. In a way, I mean, this is scary, but Trump has tapped into the mainstream of Republican primary voters. So I would not discount the possibility of him becoming the presidential candidate. On the other hand, I'm optimistic enough to think that someone like Rubio, who is probably as commonsensical as you could elect in this environment among the Republicans, I think he would be the best case scenario for the Republicans.
Wendy, I don't know if I don't think that Trump has tapped into the majority of the mainstream. I think he's tapped into a lot of the fear. So you're seeing two sets. You're seeing a set that's very vocal, that's willing to get behind Trump regardless of what he says. And right now you're seeing in polling anyway, people that are silent. When you start looking at the polls, it's a very interesting separation that you see in Iowa. If you look at Republican voters in Iowa, Trump's leading. If you look at likely caucus goers and people that went to caucuses in 2008 and 2012, the top two poll getters, the top two vote getters are Cruz and Rubio. So you're starting to already see this separation of people saying, who do we think could be presidential? Marco Rubio, perhaps Ted Cruz. Who do we think is capturing our attention right now? That's Donald Trump. And I continue to think that as these debates go along, you're seeing candidates give vision and substance. That's what Rubio's been doing very well since August, which is why he went from polling in the very low single digits, being in like 7th or 8th place in the beginning of August, all the way to being second place, third place steadily throughout every poll. And I think that he's going to start overcoming, and I think that the establishment will get behind Rubio moving forward in 2016.
And yet, we've been told this from the beginning of the rise of Trump, that it's going to come to an end, and he just keeps going up. Do you actually think it's going to stop, Dasha?
I think that two things can happen. The anti-Trump candidate can emerge, or Trump can fall on his sword in some decisive way. I think that he keeps saying outrageous things and getting away with them, so to speak. But at some point, he might hit a wall, and it won't be the wall that he keeps talking about. It'll be something that just pushes his supporters over the edge. And if the momentum starts to break, I think this is very important for him. If his momentum starts to break at any point, then I think that people might start deserting him. But if they think he's a winner, the Republican Party, a lot of people will stay with him.
John?
Wendy, I think that he's actually, I apologize. I think that he's already hit some walls already, some obstacles. Let's remember, Ben Carson had overtaken him in both national polls and in Iowa already, and because he couldn't fill his candidacy with substance, he's dropped off. Ted Cruz is now overtaking Trump in Iowa. We've seen Rubio, we've seen even Kasich and Christie challenge Trump in New Hampshire in several different polls. So I think that one of the things that is happening is Donald Trump is starting to basically level off. Now, is it still a high watermark? Yes, but he's not able to continue to rise.
So then what happens? We heard the Mexicans are rapists, and now we're closing the door to the Muslims, are building a wall. I mean, does he change and become reasonable all of a sudden here?
Trump reminds me of, the physicists will say they've discovered a particle composed entirely of antimatter, and that's kind of what Trump is. They say, he started off, it was anti-Mexican, it's anti-women, anti-disabled, anti-war veteran, then anti-Muslim, like he's running out of things to posture against. And I don't think he's the sort of person who's going to start giving us detailed tax plans or foreign policy blueprints. It's just not in his DNA. So that gives us a reason for optimism that maybe he has peaked.
Yeah, does he actually believe everything that he says is doable, Lenny, do you think?
No, I don't think he does. But I mean, if your end game is to gather momentum and then broker a deal, again, he keeps telling you that he's this fantastic genius businessman, and he's all about brokering deals. If you're trying to broker a deal with whoever the nominee is going to be or the political party that you've become embedded in, then it's a different end game than just trying to win the White House. Now, you can verbalize one thing, but you can obviously have a completely different strategy. And if you look at where he has the Republican Party, it's interesting. He doesn't want Muslims coming to the United States because he doesn't want Muslims holding the United States hostage. But Donald Trump has been holding the Republican Party hostage in regards to this possible third-party run for months now. It's a brilliant strategy, but it's very, very devious in some other regards, obviously.
A few more months to go. Thanks so much, Lenny. Lovely to hear your point of view, and thanks, guys, as usual.
Thank you. God bless.